The following video is not about any current medical crisis or policies or anything like that. This is a retrospective video about the pandemic of 2018 forward, aka the Spanish flu. That's its name it's gained over the years. It's inaccurate as hell. And I'm going to be talking about patient zero in a minute, or the multiple patient zeros. As is usual, when we look up some simple answer, it's wrong. 1917, pathologist and British military doctor William Rolland wrote a report that described cases of British soldiers in France who had contracted an unusually fatal respiratory illness, and he made human tissue samples and slides. These were very valuable because they showed that this had been brewing and had been mutating and was already in the human population doing the same thing, but it was missing some characteristics. And I know this is going to sound very familiar, but again, this is 1917 and 1918. Here we go. Lots of people were silent carriers, otherwise known as asymptomatic carriers of the disease. Lots of people would have very mild symptoms. The majority of people who would get really sick from it were 27-year-olds instead of being really old or really young, and also babies as well. But at first, it mostly spread because that's what it's selected for. Unlike previous flus, where people over 60 and under the age of 10 would get sick in a fairly linear progression that looks like a kind of a U shape or an upside down bell, you get this thing where you get a spike at 27 and a spike below the age of 8. Now, who was patient zero? Now, at this point, we have to say that patient zero is a vague term when it's a fully fledged, acknowledged version of it. There are several names that come up. Albert Martin Gitchell, South Dakota self-employed butcher, is listed. Also, Albert Gitchell, the Army private cook at Fort Riley or Camp Funston, Kansas, who came from Haskell County, Kansas. And that was on 1918, March 4th, when he checked in. Now, in Haskell County, there was Dr. Loring Minor, who warned the U.S. Public Health Service about this infection a month or two before. So that definitely makes it to where it has to be Haskell County. Except the records for this, as you might imagine, are screwed because Haskell Institute, Indian school or education or re-education camp, existed and is a more likely suspect. The actual report that's attributed to Dr. Loring Minor lists a bunch of specifics that were also identical to the one at the Haskell Institute, not Haskell County. Yet, Haskell County, the Haskell Institute, and someone from South Dakota all had the infection within plus or minus 1 week of each other, and did or did not report immediately. And this information has been redone repeatedly since then because people wish to make assertion into fact. The Haskell Institution for Native Americans was found to have horrible living conditions, punishing people, and basically forcing people to convert to Christianity was its job. This is a common occurrence back in the 1910s, 1920s. Just deal with the fact that it happened. People don't like that idea of that being a location that had this happen because of something very obvious. The Native American population was more susceptible, as is per usual, to this particular virus that could take a high portion of the population and kill them. It is not something people are comfortable with. All of these locations did or did not have the same conditions that you would expect would cause this. A mixture of animals, humans, birds, and wild animals in the area that could trade back and forth viruses that would normally not be able to jump zootonically to humans, but did. The presumption that, well, there's humans and then there's animals is stupid because if it can go from a bat to a horse, it can jump to a human a little bit more easily. The more versatile a virus is, the more likely it is to jump from another species. Making us a subset that's a major portion of the discussion rather than just being yet another creature means that we don't acknowledge that storing animals in close proximity to each other, like a wet market in Wuhan, is a bad idea. Now, if you're doing a small farm and you take care of all your animals, the only one who's going to be injured is probably you. It might be a petri dish to grow a magically terrifying virus simply because of the close proximity, but it's not likely. But when you have Fort Riley or Camp Funston in Kansas with thousands of people going in and out from everywhere in the United States, mixing people together who have never had contact with this stuff, or you have an Indian Haskell Institute where you have a mixture of populations that are in horrible conditions with animals nearby. By the way, the same thing happened at the Fort Riley / Funston. Or Haskell County itself that had farming populations in close proximity to a pathway where birds like Canada geese were going through or other wild animals. Any one of these condition sets, whether they be seemingly pleasant or at least tolerable or really horrible, any one of these could cause it. But the butcher living in South Dakota, that's the one I really want to look into, because that's just, I mean, how could, like a wet market. We have at least 3 patient zeros with similar names, with areas that are similar named, all getting confused by the subject. A lot like other instances like Ebola and other diseases where we don't know exactly who the first person was, because there's no cutoff unless you're defining a cutoff, and in which case you can get placed in anywhere you want to. Did the disease start, in fact, in France and in Europe in 1917 with Dr. William Rolland noticing it because it matches, or the fact that he saved slides and it shows that it was a precursor or a fully fledged version of it. There's lung tissue that's preserved in frozen bodies and also medically preserved tissue that have been genetically sequenced to show that, yes, this was much more widespread. It would travel through whatever population it had adapted to, that it had designed itself or redesigned itself to attack very specific characteristics. The proteins on the upper respiratory system versus the lower respiratory system into your lungs, versus the ones inside of your digestive system, versus the ones inside of the sinuses or eye socket. If a virus can replicate in the eye socket or in the lining of your nose, it's going to have a different set of pattern of behavior versus one that has to be pulled all the way down into your lower lungs. Do not breathe deep during a plague. Breathe shallow or wear a filter. We call them masks. But this is echoing of something a lot of us have experience with. I'm not going to bring up all of the hemming and hawing and avoiding of solving the problem as best they could at the time that happened that's identical. Or people screeching about how they would just rather take the chances with fate rather than empowering themselves. Laying on the train track saying, if the train hits me, I'm okay with it, is a lot worse than rolling over and avoiding it. Some of us cannot understand the strong tendency of American citizens specifically, and humans in general, to avoid doing what would provide the highest likelihood of success. I mean, it may not work perfectly, but it's better than nothing. The all or nothing, throw in the towel and dive off the cliff head first attitude. They're not lemmings, because even lemmings don't really do that, is amazing and disheartening to me. The fact that I can read article after article after article of people proclaiming the same level of stupidity to be a valid and meritorious thing in the 1918 plague, we have learned nothing. So applying what we know now and can easily adapt to, A, make sure the conditions at any animal farm out there is better. B, stop acting like you're separate from them and do that same level of hygiene and quarantining in the general populations. Next, personal request. During the holidays, stop traveling from point A to point B during pandemics. I mean, for fuck's sake, stop it. Next, stop bitching about it being everybody else's problem. Do it yourself. But anyway, Albert Gitchell, whether it's middle name Martin, whether it's South Dakota or a Fort Riley Cook. It originally came from, again, Haskell County, and also a similar name, Haskell Institute, having this all happen at the same time, about a year after it happened in France to British citizens. We'll never have a patient zero. We'll never have somebody to blame or to hail as a survivor, depending on your attitude. It's a short video, really. I'm just mostly uncomfortable with its consequences and the lack of recognition it gets. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.